welcome everyone to this Driven Innovations to Improve Healthcare conference call. All have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you'd like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Ms. Winifred Quinn, you begin your conference.
Thank you so much, Karina. So, Anna, go to the second slide, please. So, good afternoon and good morning to some, and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, Nurse-Driven Innovations to Improve Health. I would like to point out 2 logistical notes about today's webinar. First, we are recording it, so if you miss a section or would like to pass it on to a colleague, which we highly encourage you to do, you would find the recording by going to www.caneforaction.org/webinars. And it should be uploaded to our website in the next couple of days. Second, I do want to let you know that we will take questions over the phone toward the end of the webinar, but do invite you to type questions throughout the webinar using the chat function. If you do so, please send your questions to everyone. So before I introduce our excellent lineup of speakers today, I want to explain why we are having this webinar. We at the Center to Champion Nursing in America and the Campaign for Action, we plan a set of webinars about how people's access to care and quality of life can be improved and are improved through nurse-led innovations. These innovations could be in terms of hands-on work, workarounds that nurses have been creating throughout time, such as the Maker Nurse program. Innovations could be process innovations, such as what has been coming out of Transforming Care at the Bedside and other such programs. These innovations could be about developing technologies, such as virtual reality and augmented reality. Now, nurses are exploring ways of improving healthcare with them, like here today. The Institute of Medicine challenged nurses to be leaders in all areas of care and in many arenas, including emerging fields of technology and innovation. The Institute of Medicine saw this challenge as a means to reach the end goal of improving people's access to and quality of health care. With that in mind, that is the purpose of today's webinar. We will hear from 3 nursing educators about how they are using innovative technology and are innovating nursing education. And it's all to improve people's access to and quality of care. After hearing from the 3 nursing education and innovation leaders, we will have dialogue with them and 2 leaders from health information and the technology sectors about the value of having nurses as leaders in innovation. That, I am now very happy to introduce you to our first set of speakers. So if you could go to the next slide. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Therese Richmond, also known as Terry. Terry is the Andrea B. Laporte Professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and serves as its Associate Dean for Research and Innovation. She has an extensive program of research aimed at improving recovery from serious injury by addressing the interaction between physical injury and its psychological repercussions. Her science also focuses on prevention of violence and firearm violence. Mary will then hand over the presentation to her UPenn colleague, Marian Leary. Marian is the Director of Innovation Research for the Center Resuscitation Science at the University of Pennsylvania and the Innovation Specialist at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and instructor in the Penn Master Public Health Program. Mary has focused her research and education over the past 10 years on cardiac arrest and CPR quality, with the current goal of developing innovative strategies to improve CPR and resuscitation training. And Marian wraps up. She will then hand over the mic, so to speak, to Dr. Nancy Hanrahan. Nancy assumed the position of Professor and Dean of School of Nursing and Senior Associate Dean of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for Beauvais College of Health Sciences Eastern University in July 2015. She is a national leader in psychiatric mental health nursing and known for her research documenting the psychiatric nurse workforce and research innovative models of care. Dr. Hanrahan leads the Innovation Entrepreneurship Program at Northeastern University's Bouvet College of Health Sciences, and this program empowers nurses and health professionals to lead innovation that transform health systems using big data, device inventions, robotics, innovation of the experience care by patients and families. So with that, Terry, please take it away.
Thanks, Winifred. I'm thrilled to be here, and we can go to the next slide. So, and welcome from, I really bring greetings from University of Pennsylvania, which was founded by Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin said that all knowledge development was for social good. I think why innovation now is because health and well-being are in peril. I don't think any of us who are practicing as nurses could argue that point. And further, systems are broken. We all know that the healthcare system has many issues that we need to deal with, but there are broader social systems that are not necessarily serving the health and well-being of individuals, families, or communities well. And finally, at Penn Nursing, one of our foundational values is social justice, and we continue to see health inequity and health disparity, which lower the health and well-being of the entire population. Next slide. So what is innovation? There are many definitions of innovation, and you can all think in your mind what innovation means to you. But at its most simple root, think of it as solving clinical, social, and even complicated problems in new ways. When we talk about innovation, we often talk about disruptive innovation, that I'm instituting something that is a game changer. If you think about companies like Amazon or Uber and the ride-sharing services, they typify disruptive innovation. I think in nursing we can have disruptive innovation, but I think of it more as transformative. Is how do we handle or manage difficult problems in new ways that are innovative, that will transform our ability to improve the health and well-being of people. So I would broadly define innovation in the nursing space from that lens. Next slide. So nursing, why should nurses be innovators? Well, it's important to recognize that since nurses are in the front lines of everywhere that people live, play, work, and heal, that we are well positioned to see all the problems. We can think about those problems, and most importantly, we can act on those problems. Nurses are inherent problem solvers. Of course, when I give up my clinical practice days, I had to solve problems almost every day. And I really had to solve problems in all shifts, night shift, weekends, when we really were the ones in the health system dealing with issues. So why did we have to be innovators then? Because we needed to get the job done to care better for patients. But what I did is what most nurses do, and we solve a problem, we work around, and we move on to the next problem. And I think my experience most likely represents the experience of many nurses. So we're inherent problem solvers. Necessity is the mother of all invention. We are expert workarounds. We don't follow them through systematically to change entire systems of care. Slide. So what's the problem? The innovation is lost. We tend to solve the same problem repeatedly. And nurses tend not to perceive themselves as innovators. Nurses tend to perceive themselves as I'm solving a problem on my patient's behalf. So we need to move it from I'm a problem solver for my patient. I can really create innovative solutions to improve the care of multiple patients. Finally, other people don't necessarily view nurses as innovators. Nurses often come up with innovative solutions, but are not viewed as the driving innovator. Why is that? I think it's because we have untapped potential. Innovation is not a core component of nursing curricula. We have basic sciences, we have theory, we have research, we have clinical courses and clinical rotations. We need to infuse innovation as a core component of the nursing curriculum. So enough already, we need to really move all of us to another level. Next slide. So it's the good news. And I've said this before, nurses are natural innovators. We feel compelled to solve patients' problems, and we are creative in any number of environments. So we need to take that and build on that and move that to a new level, so it's not just a one-and-done kind of solution, so that we can really create these solutions and improve the care across systems of care. We also have nurse researchers who I think straddle the research innovation chasm. So in my school, for example, we have nurse researchers. One of our nurse researchers, Dr. Kathy Bowles, who's a professor in my school, developed a decision support tool for discharge planning of vulnerable older adults. She did this over a series of several R01 studies. And once she really developed the algorithm, developed a company and founded a company and embedded that algorithm within decision support tools with health systems. And it was a terrific example of taking nurse research, creating the algorithm, commercializing it, and technologically embedding it in electronic health records and decision support systems in hospitals. And she ultimately sold her company, and you make money when you sell a company, so that's a good thing. And that the algorithm continues to be used in health systems. So we see the range from individual clinical nurses at the bedside to nurse researchers. Next slide, please. So other news. This is how I visually think about this. I see a huge missing link. I see many clinicians do fabulous one-off solutions. I see researchers who are building their science, creating new knowledge, and embedding it through such things like technological decision-making algorithms to improve care. But we have a big missing link. It's a big, missed, huge opportunity where we need to prepare nurses. So let's think about the clinicians with knowledge and the toolboxes and a rigorous approach to innovative thinking. We need to infuse things like innovation, design thinking, entrepreneurship within the curriculum of nursing to take equal footing with basic science, theory, research, and clinical practica. That's what we'll talk a little bit about today. Next slide. So here are some foundational principles that I think about as I think about innovation and how do we best prepare nurses. One is start early. So I'm of a generation where this never crossed my radar. We want to get nurses when they first enter their undergraduate programs, when they're young and excited and they haven't gotten their mindset boxed in to one way of thinking, to start really, really thinking innovatively. And we need to create innovative educational programs and need to think beyond the healthcare system. Wherever patients and people are that we need to keep healthy is where we should be focusing. I think it's important that we conceptualize innovation broadly. My colleagues in Marion, who follows me here, hears me say this all the time. We need to think well beyond widgets. And I use widgets almost as a code term that we need to think about innovation as technology, but not just technology, but social innovation and process innovation and innovation in teaching and innovation in how we best reach the public and best reach patients. So we need to think well beyond just widgets. Indeed, I went to an accelerator pitch day yesterday at Penn, and most of the innovations were process innovations. They require technological technical support for the innovations. So they're highly intertwined, the technology and the process, and that's an important thing to remember. We need to provide students with rigorous innovation toolboxes, but we also need to help them bolster their complex system thinking. Is how do I work a system? How do I work a problem? And, I think, dare I say, how do we manipulate systems and work complex systems to induce the innovations that we want to accomplish the end game? So in that case, I'd remind us that manipulation is not a four-letter word, and that we need sophisticated thinkers of systems in order to infuse innovation into the system. Next slide, please. Continuing with foundational principles, I think we need to be true to the interdisciplinary nature of innovation. It is absolutely critical to think about new solutions across disciplines with very, very different lenses than nursing. We bring something extraordinarily important to the table. We bring an understanding of problems, a skill set of working with patients and families that is essential as we think about infusing innovations and creating new innovations to improve health. I think we also need to create a culture of inquiry in every place that nurses practice. Sometimes I think in education, and people can disagree with me on this, and you can bring this up in our discussion section, that we get focused on doing things right, and there's a reason for that, and thinking very rigorously, if you do this wrong, you're going to kill a patient. You don't follow the step-by-step process, you might kill a patient. And we do all this for patient safety, and that's exactly right. But we don't want to send the message that we need to just constantly follow that step-by-step rather than questioning everything that we do and really infusing a culture of inquiry. And we need to infuse a rigorous methodologic approach into innovation and finally get faculty up to speed. So one of the 10 nursing mottos, and we say this all the time, is especially as we work across disciplines at Penn in the innovation space, is every product and process that touches a patient goes through a nurse. And because of that, nurses need to be at times the prime innovator. They need to be partners in innovation. They need to think about the impact of innovation that affects patients and the ethical and social issues that go with those innovations. So nurses are central to the process. Slide. So I'll get 2 or 3 very short exemplars, I guess, of thinking about how we infuse innovation into the curriculum. I'll talk for a couple minutes on the Hillman Scholars Program in Nursing Innovation, a broader way of how do we think about preparing students and in helping get faculty up to speed, because faculty are not necessarily, they haven't been groomed to think in the innovation space. So to bring students along, we need to bring faculty along as well. Slide. So the Scholars Program in Nursing Innovation, which is funded by the Rita and Alex Hillman Foundation, certainly in our program at Penn, is to cultivate the next generation of cutting-edge researchers, leaders, and nurse innovators, and to do it early in their career. So this program is an integrated BSN PhD, and I want to make sure people understand what I mean by integrated BSN PhD. That is, we have students who are concurrently both BSN and PhD students. Some of students finish 5 or 6 of their PhD courses before they complete their BSN because they're taking them simultaneously. And we even have had students take their PhD qualifying exams prior to completing their BSN. This is out of the box. It's out of the box thinking, and I think the Hillman Foundation was brilliant in providing support for this. It really changed the landscape, I think, in how we think about education. As a result, we have 19-year-old PhD students, 18 and 19-year-old PhD students that really are graduating when they're 22, 23, really have long careers ahead of them and think very much out of the box. And here comes the second Penn Nursing motto. We had to move in order to make this work from why we can't to how do we. So I think as we think in the educational space, we have to get out of we can't do this because to how do we? How do we make the system work? Next. So I won't go through the details of this, but suffice it to say, integration, innovation, and impact are the three themes driving the program at Penn. And I'll say just a couple things to really think about. This was a really good example of innovation at work. We enrolled our first class in 2010, 2011, before we really had all the kinks worked out. We were willing to be at the forefront, challenge the norms, to take risks, and to know that we would have opportunities to course correct. And to make all of that work, we were committed to rapid prototyping, and we were absolutely committed to co-creating and co-problem solving the development of the program with the first group of Hillman scholars. In fact, I called them the ninjas because we were willing to try something, course correct, and try something again. And finally, we committed to being principle-bound versus rule-bound. So principle-driven, like this is what we're trying to accomplish, and let's think about many different ways to do that. Slide. Let's give you an exemplar. This is a photo of Matthew Lee. So Matthew is a Hillman Scholar in Nursing Innovation at Penn Nursing, and Matthew came to nursing from the world of gaming. He's a gamer. I didn't know gamers existed until recently, I will say. But Matthew's a gamer. He's a nurse, and he's innovative. This picture of him is at E3 Expo, which is a huge event every year of industry professionals and gamers. Well, why do I bring Matthew up here? This is a quote from him. Play is a fundamental part of who we are because we all grow up playing games. The games we are designing are incredibly rich experiences. He went on to say, as a designer, I make it a priority to make sure games help create thoughtful, engaging, accessible for people from all walks of life. As a nurse, he's committed to building resilience and helping players develop positive mental health. So he's not intent on building a therapeutic game. He's intent on making positive mental health embedded in all the games that your teenagers, your kids, your students are playing. It's incredibly innovative and an interesting space for nursing to work in. Slide. So there's a couple lessons learned from this whole process. We need to leave behind why we can't. Well, university rules don't allow it. Or we've never done it that way. Or a 19-year-old nursing junior student can take a PhD theory course. And we need to embrace how do we? Let's try it. We need to revel in the fun of doing it, and we need to be willing to course correct. And the most important point I'd like to make is if we want students to become nurses who are innovative, we need to walk the talk in educational settings. We need to show we are right there with you and we are willing to innovate and take the chances that go with being an innovator. Next slide. So a couple of things about preparing students. Marion, who speaks after me, is working working with the Student Innovation Club, and we have student champions. We've created student internships and PhD fellowships at our Penn Medicine Center for Healthcare Innovation, where they get to work on real-life problems, real-life solutions, and have real-life experiences. There are a zillion, I feel like there are a zillion accelerator hackathon, makeathon programs on campuses and beyond, and we should jump at the opportunity to participate. And we should celebrate every single accomplishment and every single chance that students take. Slide, please. We want to infuse innovation into the curriculum. So we're mounting a course here at Penn, Innovation in Health, Foundations of Design Thinking, that's across undergraduate and graduate curriculum. That's interdisciplinary. It really provides ways of thinking and rigorous approaches to design thinking with a focus on health and well-being, right? So focus on health systems as well, but remember, health and health systems are not synonymous terms. And we use a flipped classroom approach so that we're together, they do group work. Next. Design thinking is a lot of people are looking at this now. Whoa. People are looking, sorry, my computer just went black. A lot of people are thinking about design thinking now, and we're thinking at it from an empathy perspective, defining, ideating, prototyping, iterating, and testing innovation. Our Penn Medicine Center for Healthcare Innovation uses a discover, design, diverge, and validate model. IDEOU uses other types of approaches. What's common about all of these, and I'm not sure it matters which you use, is it's a systematic, rigorous, thoughtful process in recontextualizing a problem and coming up with interesting and new solutions. Slide. So I'll say this because you can't see me, but I have gray hair, that we have to get faculty up to speed, right? This is a new territory for many nursing faculty. We have done several things to facilitate this. We've established faculty innovation fellows, so we embed faculty innovation fellows in the Penn Medicine Center for Healthcare Innovation. We encourage them and facilitate their participation in accelerators, hackathons, makeathons, and build linkages across campus. So one of our faculty members is working with a group of senior engineering students in a design project. So we really are making those linkages. We also want to highlight their accomplishments. But this I'll say for anybody who's in an administrative role on this webinar, you must make innovation a strategic priority. When we make it a strategic priority, that means we're going to put resources into it. Strategic priorities drive the flow of resources. So making innovation a front burner, high priority item is important so that it can move forward versus just giving lip service. Yesterday, I went to the Innovation Accelerator Pitch Day at Penn Medicine Center for Healthcare Innovation. And of the 4 accelerator projects, one was driven by a nurse, and it was extraordinarily positive and strong, and I'm sure we'll be moving to the next step. So we want real-life problems and creating real-life solutions. So as I come to the end of my comments, we think, of course, nurse innovation starts at Penn. So I'll just give that as an advertisement, and we are absolutely committed to creating and testing innovative solutions. You can see just a few of our faculty. Tanya Kroll, who has an early startup company using technological health applications for nutrition in autistic kids on autistic spectrum disorder. And Pam Pacione, who's working with engineers to develop smart socks for monitoring heart failure. So we have multiple examples, and this is our faculty as they're moving along this innovation frontier. And my final slide, we can go, Anna, to the next slide, is here's how you can reach me. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone, and I'm thrilled to be at University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and playing in the sandbox right now as we move forward on innovation. With that said, I'm going to pass the baton or the microphone or the telephone over to Marion Leary, who is our next speaker on virtual and augmented reality. Marion, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Terry. Hi, everyone. I am super excited to be here talking with you all today about nursing innovation, as I truly believe nurses are at the forefront of innovation and leaders in this field. Dr. Richmond talked with you about the foundational components of nursing innovation, but I'm going to be talking with you about a specific innovation I'm working on using virtual and augmented reality. InfMe includes how we talk about health and healthcare and how we educate ourselves, our patients, and their families. I believe virtual and augmented reality hold great potential for doing just that. Therefore, as it says on the slide, today I'm going to be speaking with you specifically about the work I'm doing using innovation and immersive technologies to improve bystander training and education for sudden cardiac arrest. Next slide, please. So here are my disclosures. I do have some things to disclose. I have a number of research grants that were awarded to help create these technologies I'm going to be discussing today. And additionally, I'm also currently working on commercializing some of these technologies through the university's licensing office. Next slide. So for background, so that we're all on the same page, in the U.S. there are over 350,000 sudden cardiac arrest events annually, and survival is low, 12%. That's because for every minute a victim in cardiac arrest goes without CPR, their chance of survival decreases by 10%. Bystander CPR and AED use, the automated external defibrillator, can double the chance of survival, but most victims will not receive this life-saving intervention. In the U.S., just 40% of victims will receive bystander CPR. And in the city of Philadelphia, home of the Super Bowl Philadelphia Eagles champions and the NCAA basketball champions, the Villanova Wildcats, it's just 16%. So survival is really low, and it's variable across cities and states. Slide, please. So here lies the problem. Sudden cardiac arrest, by definition, is sudden. We don't know who's going to have it, when, or where, which makes it really difficult to train people for, and it makes it really difficult to study. Next slide. The CPR training was discovered over 50 years ago, and in that time, survival has only incrementally increased. And I believe that's partly due to the fact that we are still training people basically the same way, in the classroom setting, completely devoid of any stress or emotion of what it's actually like to have to respond to these types of emergency events. Practicing on a mannequin is not the same thing as performing CPR in a real-life setting on a real-life person. Next, please. And to confirm these theories, just last month, a new study of actual bystander response in the out-of-hospital setting concluded that current CPR training programs are not adequately preparing rescuers for the realities of an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. I couldn't agree more. Next slide. That's where augmented and virtual reality come in. We can use technologies to heighten realism for sudden cardiac arrest education and training, so that people are not just prepared with the skills to perform CPR, but are emotionally and mentally prepared to step up and act when needed. Today, we're reviewing 3 different applications that I've created for the purposes of research. Our immersive sudden cardiac arrest virtual reality platform, our mobile sudden cardiac arrest virtual reality application, and augmented reality CPR training application. Now, just for those who may not know, virtual reality is a computer-based or 360 videoed environment that immerses the user in a virtual world by a wearable headset. You interact with the virtual environment, but you can't see the real world. Augmented reality, on the other hand, includes also a wearable headset. You can interact with a programmed holographic environment as well as the real environment at the same time. For those of you who have kids or grandkids, think Pokemon go. Now, studies have found that surgeons who've trained using VR had made 40% fewer mistakes. A recent meta-analysis of clinical trials have found that using VR immersive can significantly change behavior in real-life settings. So, which, as someone who's trying to increase bystander response, this is very reassuring. There are a number of studies showing that virtual augmented reality really do heighten training and education. In addition, there's been a study that looked at learners who used VR and had a 67% increase in learning effectiveness and recall. In terms of augmented reality, there's less data out there right now, but there have been some studies that show that AR can make education more productive, pleasurable, and interactive, which as educators, I think we all would really appreciate any sort of device that does that. And it also allows learners to have instant access to relevant information for just-in-time learning. Next, please. Great. So the first study that we worked on here at the Penn Center for Resuscitation Science was a study using our virtual reality system to observe lay responder response to an unannounced sudden cardiac arrest event. As I mentioned earlier, it's really difficult to see how bystanders will respond in the real world to any type of emergency situation. So virtual reality gives us that platform to observe response. Using the virtual reality platform, we were able to integrate a CPR feedback mannequin to create a multi-sensory system that replicated an out-of-hospital urban environment so that we could observe bystander response to an unannounced sudden cardiac arrest event. For this study, we went into communities in Philadelphia, and subjects were not aware that the study was focused on CPR or cardiac arrest, but were told to respond however they would to some type of emergency situation. This was designed so that the subjects could interact with simulated bystanders. The subjects could ask the simulated bystander to call 911, and the simulated bystander would pick up the phone and call 911. You can kind of see that here in that right-hand third panel. The subjects could also ask the simulated bystander to go get an AED, and the bystander would bring an AED back to the subject, and the subject could then apply that AED to the virtual victim. The subject could also perform CPR both on the virtual victim, but also on the mannequin that we integrated into the scenario so that it could have some tactile response. And the subject's response based on the links of the chain of survival. Do they call 911? Do they perform CPR? And do they ask for and use an AED? Next slide, please. So for about a year's time, we enrolled 119 subjects, and there was nothing really remarkable about the demographics. The one thing that I would like to just mention was our subject population was relatively young at 37 years. Subjects were either not trained in CPR or had been trained greater than 2 years prior. But what was really interesting, however, was that pre-intervention, 51% of subjects stated they knew how to use an AED, which is quite high. Next slide. The main results from that study. We found that once the simulated victim experienced the cardiac arrest, most subjects knew to call 911. Large majority attempted CPR. 13% of subjects requested an AED, and only an even smaller percentage used an AED. Subjects did state that they felt that they were in a real sudden cardiac arrest event, which speaks to the fidelity of these virtual reality systems for increasing realism in the training environment. Please. We did capture CPR quality data from 81 subjects. Chest compression rate was 94 compressions per minute, and chest compression depth was 38 millimeters. Though guidelines recommend a rate of about 100 and 120 compressions per minute and a depth of at least 2 inches, the CPR quality performed was close to what we generally see from the lay public, especially considering our subjects had no idea they would be performing CPR in this study. Next slide, please. So phase 1 study. So we really wanted to see if it was feasible, if subjects would respond appropriately based on, again, those links in the chain of survival. But we also wanted to do a phase 2 study. So in the phase 1 study, as I just discussed, our victim was a white male. So for our phase 2 study, we wanted to examine bystander response based on gender and race of the victim. Therefore, we randomized the gender, male or female, and race, black or white, of the victim, and then examined response of 75 subjects. Next slide, please. We did this because my colleague Audrey Bluer here at the Center for Resuscitation Science just completed a study of actual CPR response in the out-of-hospital setting and found that men were 1.23 times more likely to receive CPR in the out-of-hospital environment than women. And the AARP even picked up that study and reported on it, as shown here. So we wanted to see if that would hold true in the virtual environment. Next slide. For the time, I won't go through the subject demographics, but I will mention again our younger age of just 31 years for this study. And also, we only had 35% of our subjects who were women who enrolled in this study. Next slide, please. Examined all of the results as of yet, but we did quickly look at those who did receive CPR or did not receive AED based on gender of the avatar victim. As you can see, women were more likely to not receive CPR and were more likely not to have an AED used than their male counterparts, though neither of these were statistically significant. Slide. So that's how you can use an immersive virtual reality system, and that's how we're using it in community to examine bystander response. We're also looking at now taking that immersive system and paring it down for a mobile application. So what we've done is we started a randomized trial comparing a virtual reality sudden cardiac arrest mobile application to a standard mobile CPR training application without virtual reality. And we're doing this so we can make it more accessible to the general public. Next slide, please. To this, we're using a low-cost cardboard virtual reality viewer paired with a smartphone to heighten realism and increase CPR education in the communities that need it most. We're going out into low SES communities in Philadelphia, and we're doing a research study comparing and contrasting, but we're also doing a public health campaign sponsored by AstraZeneca, and going out into low SES communities in Philadelphia, training them in CPR using this mobile virtual reality system so that we can increase their access to these life-saving trainings and also to these different technologies. Next slide, please. Here are just example slides of what the mobile VR application looks like. We have created both an English and a Spanish version, and we worked with our programming team to make sure these mobile VR systems are accessible for both visually and hearing impaired individuals. And again, as you can see, we have randomized the race and gender of the virtual victims. Next slide. Finally, I just want to briefly review our augmented reality CPR training system. We call this CPR Reality. CPR Reality uses the Microsoft HoloLens, which is an augmented reality wearable device integrated with a CPR feedback mannequin. As subjects perform CPR on the feedback mannequin, the data are rendered through the Microsoft HoloLens and then projected back out over the mannequin as a holographic image of the circulatory system. Again, you can follow the arrows from this figure going from the person doing CPR. The data go through the headset and then are overlaid back over on the CPR training mannequin. As the subject performs CPR, the blood flow to the brain and vital organs increases or decreases based on the actual quality of CPR the trainee is performing. The idea here is that if people can visually see why the quality of CPR is so vitally important, they will be more likely to perform higher quality CPR during real cardiac arrest events. We haven't yet tested this as a research study, but the concept is there. And if you would like to see how this works, I've provided a link to our YouTube video on the bottom of this slide here. Next slide, please. We're also also just starting to work on a mobile cardboard version of this as well. There's a new augmented reality cardboard application that just came out. Again, with the hope to get these types of technology trainings out to a larger population of people who could benefit most. Here's just some screenshots of the very preliminary version of the mobile augmented reality application that I'm working on with my development partner, Bricks and People. Next slide, please. I really believe that virtual and augmented reality can increase realism for all time-sensitive emergency conditions, not just sudden cardiac arrest, but stroke, anaphylaxis, casualty, active shooter, etc. There are limitless possibilities to increase realism and train people better on how to save lives if we can increase the realism of these trainings. Next slide. Just with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to connect with me via social media. I really appreciate your time and listening to my presentation. So with that, I'm going to now introduce Dr. Nancy Hanrahan, who will be talking with you about nurse-driven innovation to improve health.
I'm sorry, I was on hold. Everyone, it's really good to be talking to you today and sharing this topic of innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm currently in Orlando, Florida, which is a nice change from Boston, which is under the throes of winter. But I'm here at a conference, an international district conference, and noting that they too are very interested in innovation and change and how that they can approach the whole idea that change is coming. So there is change coming. Everybody knows this. These forces of change are going to shape the future of nursing practice. And it is my belief that we need business and design tools and strategies required for nurses to transformative drivers of better patient and healthcare outcomes. Because of the timing of the webinar, I'm going to kind of move fairly quickly through the next slide. Move on, Anna, from objectives into the next slide. Just create some sense of how big this is. In 2016, the global digital market was $179.6 billion, and it is expected to grow to $537 billion by the end of 2025. And 2025 is only around the corner. We are really in the equivalent of an industrial revolution. We can call it the digital health revolution, but as in the industrial revolution, everything changed. Jobs, expectations, markets, it's just a whirlwind of change. And many people are quite uncomfortable with these kinds of changes, and particularly, I think, nurses, because we're not equipping them with the competencies and skills that they need to go forward. Major changes, though, nurses have been engaged in is the electronic health record, physician entry, telehealth, mHealth, population health, and clinical decision support. Those are the major areas of focus. One thing we know about this change right now is that our healthcare system is way too fragmented and siloed and disorganized to absorb these changes. So we need to really focus on creating infrastructures, not only in the way that we're doing higher education for nurses to move into healthcare positions, but we need to pay close attention to those nurses that are in faculty positions and are practicing nurses in healthcare. So we need some radical transformation about how we manage health and healthcare. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the key challenges slide. You can move beyond that because everyone knows about the costs, the fact they're in business models that don't work, and we know our patients are quite confused about how to maneuver in our healthcare situations. We need to have skills to address these health challenges, and these new competencies help nurses not only to survive, but if nurses get the focus, because we're the largest workforce in the health professions, we can actually make a huge impact, a population-level impact on how well we move through this digital health revolution. I think that one of the outfalls of nurses not being as prepared as they need to be is that we are on fewer boards and not being asked or engaged in a lot of the policy discussions. Goodness, that is changing. The campaign for the future of nursing has been enormously successful at making those changes. We need to add a little more meat to the bones on how we are going to get nurses up to speed. So nurses need competency in radical collaborative teams that inspire creative thinking among practitioners from all disciplines, perspectives, and backgrounds. These different points of view are key in pushing out of the box thinking, radical and unreasonable ideas. Those are almost words that are not even heard in the healthcare environment, which is a very protective, risk-averse situation. So I'm going to talk a little later about how it is that we're going to make these happen. We also focus on real-world projects. Much business education has begun to focus their attention on using case studies for educating their students. I think that we need to really shift over to case studies more and more to educate nurses on how to have an impact. Decision-making processes that empower rapid and iterative decision-making while fostering co-creation and co-ownership is another skill that we need to embrace. We need to have a high tolerance of failures. We need to teach ambiguity and risk are good for you. We also need to teach nurses the idea of scaling an idea. Right now in clinical settings, there's just tons and tons, as Terry and Marion both said, tons of nurses that are incredibly innovative. We do lack that. However, the idea of scaling it beyond units, hospitals, is still not even in the vocabulary of action for nurses. So education challenges is we need to make these nurses become comfortable with being leaders, who we already know, experts in the art of communication, that integrate provider teams and driven by information technology. They must understand how to apply data to understand the context of care and decision-making across the healthcare environment. And furthermore, I just want to really emphasize that no one closer to the patient, and there's no professional that has a number one responsibility about advocating for patients, and we need to become very familiar with what this means for patients. It is a new world for patients to adopt technology in order to monitor their health, to become decision makers in their health, and that may be for some providers and nurses a really big challenge. So Terry did such a beautiful job in talking about what is innovation. It's really being comfortable with the accomplishment of the impossible, the unbelievable, the unreachable, the unattainable, till it is done, and then it is the possible, the believable, reachable, and attainable. Nurses in every shift, they do on average 27 workarounds. 27 workarounds. Meaning they figure out problems. You know, almost every 5 minutes they've got a new problem, and in 36 different places per shift. Those of you who are nurses, like me, I trained 40 years ago. The healthcare setting is very different now than it was back then. You go to these ICUs, they're high-tech places. You just need to have that knowledge and the skill and the decision-making capacity to manage those environments. I'm going to slip by the first nurse innovator, the Florence Nightingale, a very powerful woman who changed the status quo, and gives you a better sense of some examples of some nurses that I know that are showing up in our events. Mary Pompey, she and her husband started the company Exergen, and they designed this temporal thermometer, and many of you probably are using it. McLaughlin, she was a pediatric ICU nurse, and she noted that babies were bleeding out from their Laurel lock system, that she found the lock has patented back in the early 1900s, and she has redesigned that Laurel lock and is moving on into being funded and will probably be sold to a company that will make them henceforth. And of course, you just heard Marianne Leary, who is a nurse entrepreneur extraordinaire. And I had noted, but Matthew Lee, as Tara and I share the knowledge of this wonderful, incredible young man who's truly a nurse innovator and really speaks highly to the nursing PhD program at Penn, that they are embracing the differences that he brings forward. So what are nurses? Why are we valued innovators? Well, I think our biggest credential is that we have been for the past 16 years at the top of Gallup polls as the most ethical and honest health professionals, according to out of 10 Americans. It's incredible. The group professionals below us is more than 20 below us. I mean, we stand out in this regard. However, it's really interesting. If you ask people what we do, they don't know what we do. They can't explain it. And they do know, however, that we're the very lifeblood and connective tissue of the U.S. healthcare system. Making the leap from that position into leading agents for the redesign of the healthcare system is the agenda. So a leader takes people where they want to go, and a great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to go. And a wonderful quote by Rosalind Carter, because our mission at Northeastern is to advance nurses to the forefront of healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship. And we mean it. It's both the undergrad and grad nurses that we're educating, but there are 57,000 nurses that practice in the Boston area. By the way, the digital revolution is going on at an extraordinary pace. So we're right in sync with all that going on. So we provide lifelong education experiences, grow business, finance, technology, policy, applications for whatever the device is. And I think an important thing that we also provide is a space away from the busy clinical setting to relax and innovate with colleagues. I do think many of these hospitals have taken on innovation hubs. Nurses just don't participate in them, as I've learned from many of them who talk about how they operate. They don't participate. They're too tied into what their responsibilities are with patients, and they can't get away. So big spaces outside of the hospital and linking them to the hospital activity, the real-world activity there is what we're doing. We've created a nurse accelerator. I do believe it's the first accelerator that is just for nurses. We educate, incubate, and launch innovative ideas. Students, nurses, and faculty, whoever comes our way. By the way, I've been doing this long enough to know that nurses have very unique ideas. They're the ones that come up with the idea. For instance, if a patient has a stroke and they take them to the bathroom and they need some privacy, what are nurses nurses came up with the idea of how to put a strap on that patient to secure their safety and give them some privacy versus having the nurse have to be in the room at that time. Those are the kinds of solutions that we come up with. The lawyer lock is another example of that. Matt Lee, he came up with an example of a real-world problem at Penn to help college students become more familiar with depression and how to treat it. The other thing that we're doing with education and incubating is that we are growing relationships with business community. There are many businesses that focus in on developing devices and products that, by the way, are first by nurses, but do nurses get engaged in that design process? They do not. We're really promoting the idea that nurses need to be at the front edge of the design. Researchers can also contribute with feasibility and pilot random control trials for new devices and lead in that particular sector. But we've been having a great success with our partnerships with businesses and health systems. And so I just want to give you a little taste of what we're doing. We have leadership and entrepreneurship courses that are going through undergrad to grad, their certificates, and so course credits. We don't necessarily think that a nurse needs a course to move them along, but they do need they need a certificate that can then be built into getting a master's degree if that's what they want at some point. What I want to underscore is it's urgent that we get nurses up to playing with all of these incredible startup companies and companies that are already in motion around innovating devices. Hackathon, as mentioned, is a very big a place to learn how to play in this area. Hackathons, you get a multidisciplinary approach. You go from an idea that somebody has and you develop the idea with mentorship. And we have many, many people who have volunteered to be mentors to our growing groups of nurses, engineers, business students, or business people, and designers that are taking these ideas and moving forward. Our Risk Pitch-a-thon is like the Shark Tank on TV. We call it the Shark Tank. And why it's the reverse is because it's this one is being run by AARP. It's going to be focusing on how can we develop the technology to let people age in the home. We have companies that are moving forward with their ideas right now. We're screening a lot of companies because we bring in a more mature company that can go on and work with AARP in a more extensive incubator situation. The other area that we're working is with nurse practitioners. We've nurse practitioners to grow their skill and their understanding of the business side of healthcare, and also how to build value-based clinics, primary care clinics, and set them up in a business model that is not a medical business model, but a value-based population health business model. We've been very successful. We had a conference last summer, and since then, 7 of those nurses have opened up their practice, new practices. And Lee, I'd just like to give a nod to the fact that I believe that innovation science is the cutting edge here. It's it's the place that it should have. There's very little written about this at this point in time, but we must be able to articulate this concept more fully and move it further and deeper into a research line. So I would welcome you all to visit our website. We are building a web where you can go to see key leaders in nurse healthcare reform. We call it Gallery of Nurse Innovators and Entrepreneurs. And we want to extend that because at this point, nurses are this is an unknown idea for nurses. It's so incredible what has happened in that we've created this kind of movement, and we are now getting nurses from around the world who are saying, oh, finally I can find a home. I'm an innovator, and I want to move with this idea and move forward. So I thank you all for listening, and I will pass this back to Winfred, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Terry and Marion, for that very fun and exciting set of presentations, and thank you for all that amazing work that you're doing. Before we open up the lines to all Q&A, I want to bring a couple of folks to respond to what our three presenters had to say. But before I do want to point out that the Shark Tank, the Nurse Shark Tank that Nancy described, that is occurring on Monday, June 4th in Boston. That is being, ARP is a pretty big operation, right? And the team that's sponsoring that with Northeastern, with Nancy at Northeastern, is the ARP's Enterprise Innovations Group. And it's that team within AARP that is looking to create some internal startups with the enterprise and to potentially also support external startups in their efforts. All of them having something to do with helping older adults thrive in their communities rather than needing to go to nursing homes or be unnecessarily hospitalized, and or helping their family caregivers. So Nate Shop has already sent out communication around it. Keep your eye out. The Campaign for Action will also be getting the word out about it to our audiences. With that, I would love to bring in two respondents to the presentations. We first have Molly McCarthy, who is the National Director of the U.S. Provider Market and the Chief Nursing Officer for Microsoft's U.S. Health and Life Sciences sector. You can find Molly on MSFT, and an abbreviation for Microsoft, MSFT, Molly RN. So MSFT, Molly RN. And then we also have Crystal Anderson, who is the Senior Director of Interoperability Initiative for HIMSS, which is, she's based in Chicago. She executes and directs the HIMSS Informatics Initiative, including their interoperability showcase. And you can find Crystal at Crystal_Anders on Twitter. So thank you both for joining us. So Crystal, I wanted to start with you. You, like me, are not a nurse, and rather you champion opportunities for nurses as leaders. In your role with HIMSS, 2 years ago, you convened Molly and several of her peers from other technology and health IT corporations, as well as myself, to discuss how we can underscore the important roles that nurses have in innovation and technology. We also emphasized how important it is to recruit more nurses into these roles. With that in mind, what you heard today, how did that relate to what you envision and what you would like to see occur, and so your thoughts about nurses as leaders in innovation and technology?
Thank you, Fred, and hi everyone, this is Crystal Anderson. I'm the Senior Director of Interoperability Initiatives at HIMSS. Before I answer that question, I just want to take a moment to thank you for the invitation. Really excited to be here with this amazing group of panelists, and a huge thank you to AARP, RWJF, the Future of Nursing campaign, and today's attendees. Very pleased to be here. On behalf of HIMSS, we've had a long history supporting the nursing space. We have a robust community of nursing informaticists. For those that aren't familiar with HIMSS, a lot of the slides that were presented where we talked about innovation activities and health information technologies, that's really what HIMSS focuses on. HIMSS is a healthcare nonprofit association that helps to drive innovation, interoperability, informatics. We really drive forward thinking around the best uses of information and technology. When we think around those best uses, though, it is critical for us to make sure that we have the right people at the table to drive those conversations. As our presenter shared, there are many great projects that are going on, but oftentimes the most critical voice of the patient or the nurse is left out of that. So when I had the opportunity to take on a new position at HIMSS about 2 years ago, I now oversee in my domain something that we have called the HIMSS Innovation Center. And the HIMSS Innovation Center, what we've identified and helped to design is that it's a physical place in Cleveland, Ohio, where we help to bring together thought leaders, inform the sectors, solve problems, and educate individuals on innovative technologies, trends, processes, and models. However, when I first stepped through the door, what I saw a lot of was just the technology side of it. It wasn't the full gamut of informatics. We didn't have the clinician's point of view. We didn't have what nurses were tackling, what they were addressing, and we were really missing the ideas and the brain power that our nurse leaders can bring to the table. So we had an opportunity at HIMSS conference a couple years ago to bring Winifred, thank you for coming, Molly McCarthy, who is also on the line, and several other nurse executives from vendor organizations. This is now becoming a more prominent role Molly will talk about, but for instance, IBM has a chief nurse exec, Press Ganey has a chief nurse exec. There's a lot of groups that are now seeing the value of nurse leadership in the boardroom when it comes to these vendor organizations. The other element that I want to point out is how HIMSS is contributing with several other nonprofit groups to really focus on many of the key events and key issues that our presenters discussed. We're exploring issues through our Innovation Center, such as hackathons, such as these business plan competitions. But again, what's often missing from that is people might be developing these hackathons or developing the technologies without the nurse input. And so it's critical for nurses to be at the table. A couple of examples that I wanted to highlight very briefly, and our first presenter gave the comment of ninjas. And so I wanted to briefly highlight two ninjas that have come out of HealthBox, which is a subsidiary of HIMSS. They help run a foundry out of Intermountain, and so true great examples that they shared with me today are great examples of nurse innovators stepping forward. The first I wanted to share was Jennifer Almont, who is a NICU nurse. She helped identify some challenges that were being faced in the NICU when they were taking babies off units for procedures and surgeries. And Jennifer helped, through the Foundry program, create something called Outpack. And Outpack really helps caregivers to locate items more quickly, deploy information, put the physical needs together, both either through hanging them or rolling them out, and helping to ensure fast and accurate restocking and compliance. The amount of time that she was able to help save with this Outpack prototype really helped to address the needs to focus more on the patient and the baby rather than waste time. One of the challenges I think that often comes with nurse innovators is identifying what they can do next. How do I go through time motion studies? How can they go through simulations? How can they work with manufacturers? What's the business side of it? So the Foundry is one great example of an initiative to help support that. The second that I wanted to help share and put a spotlight on is Kismet Rasmussen, who is a nurse practitioner, also from Intermountain, who went through the Foundry program. And she looked firsthand at heart failure patients at Intermountain, and she saw how heart failure education faces many challenges and issues. And so she came up with this novel idea that helps leverage simulation technology to educate and engage heart failure patients, and called HFSIM-ED. An example, though, is she helped to identify this great new idea. What she then worked through was how to identify potential competitors in this space, partnerships in the market, how to create a clear implementation strategy, and a roadmap for development. When you think about these different examples and the two ninjas I shared, what's critical is that we need nurses to help us with the ideas, be innovators, but then also help us to get to the business side of that. And I think we only have about 12 minutes left, so I will hand the mic back to you, Winifred, and looking forward to the continued dialogue.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal. And I bet most people, including most nurses, don't even know that Microsoft Corporation has a chief nursing officer. How about if you explain what you do, perhaps explain it in terms of what an average day looks like for you. And after that, if you could also respond to what we heard from our friends from UPenn and Northeastern. As a nurse and a nurse leader in the technology sector, we think is most important for nursing students to be aware of and nursing education in general.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Winifred and AARP for having me here today. It's great to talk with you all and be part of this. So, first of all, I've been at Microsoft for actually it will be 5 years in June, and the role really never existed before a few years ago. So that's in creating roles for yourself. In terms of a typical day, there is no typical day for me, which is part of the reason why I really, truly love what I do. I'm part of an industry team that drives strategy and support for the U.S. health business, and we actually just had a huge reorganization this past July, and we're very focused at Microsoft on health across both provider, payer, and life sciences. And my role within Microsoft is education to our product groups, as to our sellers and technical support folks around the healthcare market and trends that are occurring right now, as well as external education for our customers. You know, Microsoft has traditionally been focused on discussions and conversations with the IT group, but as we know, because the intersection of technology with healthcare is so prominent that you can't just have discussions with IT anymore. And so one of my roles is to bring our teams outside of the IT shop within provider organizations into lines of business so that we can have conversations with nursing officers, chief nursing informatics officers, bedside nurses, as well as informatics nurses who reside within IT. So that's one part of my role, and that's, again, education. The second really is around solution development. Because Microsoft's a platform company, essentially think of ourselves as like a framework, and we work with over 1,400 partners within the healthcare space that actually build on our solutions. So, for example, you saw Marion talk about the HoloLens solution. So the HoloLens really is the platform where many different types of applications are built. For example, there's one right now called the Holo Patient, which is being used within nursing education. So we work with other companies to provide these end solutions. So my solution area focuses on patient engagement, virtual health, clinical and operational analytics. So if we think about where we are right now within healthcare, many organizations have been very focused on implementing EMRs and really thinking about beyond that and taking that data and making it meaningful work for us so that we can achieve the triple aim, quadruple aim. And then the last part of my role is really around working with end customers and mainly large health systems across the country. And that's probably my favorite part of the job because I get to go out and what I always say is be with my people. For example, last week I spent a couple days at a large teaching facility, and specifically we were looking at the medication administration process all the way from the physician ordering to fulfillment with pharmacy, out to delivery, and then to administration by the nurse with the patient. And looking at that process, and we've talked about process earlier today, and thinking about how technology can support that process. So, for example, giving nurses visibility into when is that medication going to be delivered. Just like they might know if they order a pizza from Domino's online, look, I can track my pizza. I know it's a little bit different than medications, but taking other examples from other industries and really applying it to healthcare. So that's really the three areas that I focus on, and every day for me really can be different. In terms of thinking about what was talked about today, I've had the great pleasure of working with both Marion and Dr. Hanrahan. I will say that during Dr. Richmond's speak today, you know, I loved what she talked about was innovation is more than technology, and it truly is. It's thinking about that human, the process and the technology, and really, if you think about those three, you need them all to work. And working at a technology company, I can say that you need it more the human factor is more so than the technology some days. The other thing that she said, which I loved, was that nurses are central to the process and truly to be involved in the design and development of solutions. Because if they're not, you know, the likelihood of adoption will be greatly reduced. And I've said this from early on in my career when I worked for a medical device company out in California and worked with software and hardware engineers. You need that input right when solutions are being developed, and there's no better person than the nurse to be part of that process. And then I also just wanted to make one final comment, a couple of comments. One, I talked about with Marion, and I just wanted to shout out congrats from a Redskins fan, I know, on the Super Bowl. But thinking about, and I was actually hoping for Villanova as well, even though I'm kind of a Michigan fan as well. But I think, you know, HoloLens and other technologies, there are a couple different things. There are point solutions, then there's a framework underneath. And as nurses, you know, as Dr. Hanrahan said, we think about, 27 different workarounds that might happen during a shift, and the fact that we think about it for that particular patient. But as nurses and as such a prominent health professional in the U.S., most trusted, we need to think about these solutions. How can we scale them across other disease states? And I'll give you an example. I'm actually working with HIMSS to bring a webinar together on May 1st, and we worked with Children's Mercy out in this, and they're looking at a problem with hypoplastic left hearts in babies and decreasing mortality and morbidity in between heart surgeries. And they've come up with a solution called the Cardiac High Acuity Monitoring Program, which is actually, it was created by a nurse physician in IT. So talk about interprofessional work. It's been fabulous. And it started there a few years ago. It's now rolled out into 7 hospitals across the U.S. And so I'm just actually making a plug for that for May 1st if you want more information to hear about that. But the thing that I love about this is the nurse-driven program, and not just at Children's Mercy, but at the other hospitals been rolled out to. And it's also a solution that nurses should think about other chronic disease and conditions. How can they use a similar technology to address those problems? So that I have today. I mean, I could go on for many hours, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you briefly today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Winifred.
Great, Molly. And Molly, if you shoot me an email regarding the information on that May 1st webinar, we will get it out to our list service, or our distribution list on our website.
Sure, yeah. And that's, again, that's being put on by HIMSS, so it will be pretty fabulous. I will do that.
Okay, or Crystal, either one of you. So we do have a couple of questions in the queue, and we only have a few minutes left. So one question comes from Zaina Kayat. Have you seen any movement or momentum in the home care space with the nursing profession, especially given the macro shift away from hospital care to home care, i.e. the home health?
I can take that. This is Terry Richmond. I agree with you a lot, and one of the reasons I tried to focus on not just in the hospital, but wherever people live and play and heal, the focus in home care is really important. I think we're going to see more and more innovations happening in the home care. So we have a faculty member, Dr. George Demiris, who is at Penn Nursing, who's an informatician, who looks at the use of remote sensing in home environments to help support frail elders in their home environments. And then he and I work with community dwelling, single-parent, low-resource families, and he and I both worked with our engineering school on the NSF grant, the National Science Foundation grant application, again looking at how connected communities can help improve health in the community and in the home. So I think we're going to see increasing activity and space and interest in home health.
Then there's a question about intellectual property. How do you navigate intellectual property liability and copyright when designing ideas and inventions for financial gain that initially start within the university setting? So Marion or Nancy?
Happy to answer that question. At the university, and I know this is true for the University of Pennsylvania, that there's a department that of people that help you negotiate the intellectual property. It does get confusing when you have multiple potential owners, like the clinical side, the health system, the university, or a corporate business. But there are people that at the university that have a lot of knowledge and will guide that process really carefully. My experience has been that I use a non-disclosure agreement early on, which helps people to understand that the idea that's being presented is by the individual, but there's no legal parameters around that. It's like a copyright, so you have to understand that. Two things. One is that there is some risk to share your idea. Yes, 99% of ideas at that early phase never go anywhere. They usually evolve into the next edition and the next and the next, which is when they start to get some kind of substance to them. So the sharing of an idea is really critical to making it move.
Great. And there's a follow-up question from the same person, Antoinette. How do you progress beta projects to functional products if you have limited tech experience but viable inventions? Partnering is one way, right?
Well, it's presumed that if you're going to be doing innovation, you are going to be creating a team of people that will do the innovation with you. And usually what you have is an engineer, you have a business person or a person with expertise in business experience, have probably a programmer and a designer. As you move along, you're probably going to get a marketer that's engaged in the process with you. So it's presumed, in my experience, that entrepreneurship and innovation always involves a team of diverse people.
I'm going to chime in on that to add to what Nancy said, that I think then one opportunity that gives us is to figure out how to communicate with people from those disciplines and actually have good conversations in disciplines who may use similar words in different ways or come from things from a very different perspective. So we all have to up our game in our ability to communicate and really communicate and listen to what each others are saying.
So excellent point.
This is Crystal. I was just going to add one comment. Many of the accelerators and incubators that are sometimes regionally or nationally based, in addition to universities, offer courses. Sometimes, like here in Chicago, we have Matter. They might offer, like an IP workshop or how to get started with an idea. And sometimes they're free. Sometimes it's a nominal fee, like $15. But getting into kind of that tech flow and the tech speak and getting around other innovators is usually a great place to start. It definitely does not happen in isolation. getting connected with your local innovation community is a great place to get connected.
That's great. And I want to underscore a point that both Nancy and Terry made. It's about engaging and communicate. It's the language that you use. It's about getting out of reaching new sectors. This is something that we at the Campaign for Action have been saying for more than 7 years, and here's yet another opportunity for you to do so. So keep thinking expansively and acting expansively out there in the Campaign for Action. So it's 3 minutes past when we were supposed to end. However, if there are any phone calls, if anyone would like to ask for a question over the phone, if our presenters could stay on, maybe we could do 1 or 2 questions over the phone. Operator?
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, to ask a question, press star and then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a brief moment to compile a Q&A roster.
And Zana, thank you so much for tweeting. I'm going to get on Twitter later and retweet you. I just retweeted. Anna Hervada just retweeted you. Thank you.
And I'm showing no audio questions at this time.
Okay. So we will have this webinar archived on our website in the next few days sometime. To thank each of our speakers and presenters today. So Marion Leary and Terry Richmond from the University of Pennsylvania, Nate Hanrahan from Northeastern University, Molly McCarthy from Microsoft, and Crystal Anderson from HIMSS. Thank you all very much for taking the time to share your wisdom and knowledge and excitement and creativity work that you're doing. Hopefully we'll do one of these again